Great, I pressed the record button. So by the way, thank you everyone for taking part on this today's talk. It is ultimately today is about British colonialism, Indian nationalism, and Bengal Muslims. I hope everything works. If things work, it would be great. If not, obviously we just have to play by the ear. I'll be looking at, I suppose, a broad range of things. I will be looking at policy implications. I'll be looking at lots of statements from historians as well as political leaders. I'll be looking at dates and numbers and other things in order for you to get a practical understanding of this thing. And then, of course, ultimately we'll have more Q&As, and hopefully the types of questions that I've asked you, those questions will be answered moving forward based on this talk. And the question probably you're asking, why the hell am I giving this talk? It's partly because as part of my undergraduate degree and postgraduate degree, I did study this, and I wanted to, and also I'm working with National Portrait Gallery right now around this topic. So I thought, to make things simple for wider community, let me take the history of Bangladeshis and Bengalis and colonial Bengal to the wider public. And on that basis, I set this this seminar up for you. But when it comes to, I guess, any forms of education and learning and development, we need to think about the context in which I'm referring to. Really, in terms of context, I am talking about a colonial context, i.e. context when an external ruler, it is ruling India and the Indian subcontinent. So according to standard definition, in terms of definition of colonialism, here it is, right in front of you. A policy or practice of acquiring full or partial political control over another country, occupying it with settlers and exploiting it economically. So the question is, has that actually happened in India? Now, if you look at it in terms of economic policies, you can see that Indian manufacturing sector, by the time when we talk about 1900s, sector replaced by British manufacturing sector in British textile, led to British Industrial Revolution, resulting in Britain overtaking India as the largest cotton textile manufacturer in the world by 19th century. We've also seen, secondly, monopoly of consumers, i.e. economics policies implemented by the British ruler, which basically India became a market for selling its manufactured good, and no one else at the same time can sell in that region. So again, we're seeing monopolization of an area only British can sell. And of course, there is also a shift away from growing food to production of cotton. We've seen from 1800s to 1900s, over 30 million people died as a result of starvation because of move away from subsistence and farming to supporting creation of textile rural plantation, resulting in a lot of people not being able to meet ends meet. And of course, the businesses that came from UK, for example, or set up by UK, and the profits of the proceed of business was siphoned out of out of India into the UK. So this is what we have seen between 1879 and 1913, where a number of jute spindles rose tenfold in one way, but of course the export has also increased significantly. Now, when it comes to stats, by I suppose, Harvard University, here it is right in front of you. Prior to British colonialism, India had exported 25% of global export. That's global export. During the times of British Empire in 1900, as you can see, the export has gone down to virtually nil, and we're referring to 2%. And that's pretty much what Harvard had to say on this issue. Now, of course, we can look at the economics, but let's now look at public sphere. We can see once you have a consolidation, I guess, of a new regime, we also saw changes within administration, changes within the education system, amongst many things. What we can see is that in times of Mughal period, Persian was the language to speak in states, but it was replaced, of course, by English under Education Act 1935, where the state language was, from then on, English. But of course, we have seen other developments. We have seen railroads allow transportation of consumer goods to every corner of India. So you can say that's a development and improvement from what it was before, bringing in railway system. And of course, there was an introduction of different forms of communication through postal services. So we've seen that. So we have also seen changes within government administration. Hello there. Yeah, we have also seen changes within the governmental or governance and governance administration. Now, ultimately, in Britain, you had Secretary of State for India, a cabinet that decides how India ought to be run. And then you have, in India, you have the headquarter, i.e. central government in India, used to sit until 1911 in Calcutta. Let's not forget, Calcutta is Bengal and part of Bengal, although it is West Bengal. And then you had provinces, i.e. Calcutta, Madras, Bombay, but provinces will go to central government. By any decision, you have the cabinet. So that's the system you have. However, you did not have democracy until proper democracy, 1930s onward, which I will talk about later. Amongst all those changes, what you also have seen is changes within the collection of revenue. And as you probably know, yes, you can sell. If you're not accumulating revenue, you're not going to be functioning enough to pay for, spend, or whatever you may want to do. So we have seen a new system. This new system that already existed during colonial time by a few hundreds, but this has now, during British Raj, has become hundreds of thousands. And that system is formed in the context of zamindari system. Just to kind of give you a feel of what that actually means in practice, is where you have an Indian government, you have the tenant, there is now a creation of a new agent. That agent collected revenue from the tenant on behalf of the state. That was now institutionalized under this system. And if you look at what historian S. Hay has to say, this is where he goes. He goes, the Hindus responded to the British presence on their soil with eagerness to learn from them whatever would contribute to their advancement. As the East India Company took control over the subcontinent, it appeared Hindus for cooperation, and the latter proved to be, from the very start, staunch supporters and reliable partners of the new regime. So as you can see, now, although we call Hindu, or whichever way you want to call it, but At that time, the class of group are called Bhodralok, a sophisticated lok, but it's only used at first in the context of Bengaliness. But let me just give you a clue what's going on here. Bhodralok community includes all gentlefolk belonging to the rich as well as middle class segments of the Bengali society. Among the middle classes, a zamindar, a landlord, normally bearing the title Chaudhary or Roy Chaudhary at the end of the name and Babu at the beginning, would be considered to be Bhodralok. A zamindari bearing the title Raja or Maharaja would be considered to be the highest than middle class, but would still be a Bhodralok. Is that development of that class? But of course, it has established in terms of colonial Lolita. But you can easily imagine that as a system has been formed, both educational, structural, and public governance, we have also seen a rise, and actually Bhodralok is a classic group, a rise in indigenous intelligentsia. And one of the significant impact of that is what you call a period of Bengal Renaissance. It was Bengal Renaissance that really showed that, okay, through the process of colonialism, we have also seen a group of communities that has developed a consciousness based on learning from Rousseau, Voltaire, and French rationalism, I guess, amongst many things. And they themselves, in the context of Bengal Renaissance, have developed a new movement. Please, please, please mute yourself if you can. Yeah, so it's a cultural, social, intellectual, artistic movement in the eastern part of the Indian subcontinent during the period of British Raj. Maybe I ought to mute everyone, actually, it's better, isn't it? Yeah, so the new rulers were, as we know, wore European clothes and shoes, drank beer and spirits, and used European weapons. Their tastes were copied by the male members of the Indian middle class. Again, the middle class would be the Bhodraloks. Yes, we've talked about rise in a new class. As a result of the new class, we've also seen a new association politically. We look at the Indian nationalism, I guess. But of course, you probably know, even now, when it comes to Indian politics, you have BJP, you have Indian National Congress, first most early anti-colonial nationalist association was in the context of the Indian National Congress in 1885. Its initial, I suppose, not even demand, its request was now these days will be seen very normal, that we kind of take things for granted. Things like civil rights, i.e. there needs to be more freedom of speech, freedom of press, right to have organized processions, meetings, and other similar. These things we Western world take for granted. And then administrative, i.e. open up the administrative system to make sure more Indians are taking important roles. Thirdly, constitutional changes, i.e. when you're making legislation, make sure the legislation reflects the interest of local Indians and make sure Indians themselves get elected. And finally, economic one, where Congress blamed that the wrong policies were used by the British, which resulted in economic recession and depression, and is making things worse for the Indians and indigenous. And there was a request. Okay, I'm using the word request, right? This time is not the time to even think about revolt. However, there was a request to make sure more Indian industries were developed. Now, these are just a request. The question is, when did things from just thinking about request to become a revolt? Now, this is when we have to go back to the first Bengal partition. Sorry, Bengal partition. And that was in 1905. It was the first time in modern Indian history we've seen a nationwide revolt against its colonial master, because the purpose of the Bengal partition is to divide a country. So you have lots of countries within India. Within lots of countries in India, you have one country, in this sense, Bengal we're talking about. According to government's decisions to partition Bengal was made in 1903. The reason put forward was that the population was so large, 78 million. Now, currently, if you know about Britain, British population right now is probably about something like 60 million. So we're talking about here 78 at the time, according. And it was too large to administer. However, others say Bengal was also the center of revolt, and it was you cannot control the region, so therefore it was essential to divide Bengal. And Bengal was divided by religion. Western half then argued that should be, since it's predominantly Hindu, should be with Orissa, and eastern part where you have majority Muslim to be with Assam. So therefore, again, first time in living memory, Bengal was looked into in the context of two religious community. What was interesting, if you remember, I talked about Bhadralok, I talked about a community that has been enlightened. That community ultimately shaped in the forms of Hindu. It's the same Bengali Hindu community then found itself powerless and stopped and less enlightened, now had to share with other Hindus, West Bengal with others, that they themselves ended up becoming a minority within a Hindu community. Whilst in East Bengal, we have seen a group that never had any political affiliation or association suddenly felt the importance of their presence. However, at that time, it's all about regions consulting the colonial power, never the case about election. However, this is what Curzon said. Curzon, he's the, I suppose, a Home Secretary. He said, Bengal united is a force. Bengal divided will go in different ways. That the partition plan is opposed by the Congress, as you know who the Congress is, it's merit for us. Our principal motive is to weaken a united party against the government. You can see what where I got the who also served I suppose, who also served as viceroy. Just to give you kind of like a image what it looks like, can you see the map? That's not fantastic. As you can see, the red is Bengal, and then purple here. This is old Dhaka, and this part is East Bengal. This became East Bengal, and this is all Bengal, West Bengal, and it kind of emerged with Orissa and other places. Now, keep an eye on the percentage of the population. It's useful when we come to partition anyway. Bengal population is 54% overall, and Hindu population is 44, according to 1931 consensus. So yeah, we talked about how suddenly we have a consciousness of Muslimness and consciousness of Hinduness. I suppose you can say a structural policy decision that raised awareness of these two communities being separate. However, when we talk about one of the most important revolt against the colonial power, a partition has transformed just that. It was the same Bhadralok, don't forget the Bhadralok, enlightened, educated, who gained a great deal from this system. They are the one who ultimately led this campaign, a campaign against partition of Bengal. And it organized terrorist act, it mobilized communities, and its demand were this: from now on, we need to reject import. From now on, we need to think about local produce. From now on, we reject import of textile from Manchester. If you remember, Britain became the workshop of the globe, selling its things, manufacturing things. Now, this anti-Britain came as a result of partition of Bengal in 1905 in the context of Swadeshi movement. As you can see, to revive industry locally that were lost in colonial time. And interesting enough, this campaign was successful. Before I go into that, as you can see, Tagore, Amar Shingar Bangla, My Golden Bengal, was also written in response to the first nationalist first partition of Bengal. So am I going the right way? So yes, so here we are. So I think we looked at this, but have a look at it again. Political power of the Bengalis, born agitators as they were, had not been broken, and they would never cease to agitate until they have attained a modification. So in 1911, the partition of Bengal was annulled, and Assam and Sylhet, these two regions, by the way, a lot of the Bangladeshis you have in London and UK are from Sylhet, corner of East Bengal, which then was part of Assam, which once the partition was broken, it went back in Assam. And at the same time, once partition was annulled, we saw Calcutta no longer being the capital of colonial government. It then moved to Delhi. So what was the impact? Here we are. Edwin, Chamberlain's successor, when he formed, I mean, he just said, we need to think about more democracy. That's all it is. So you had the government of Indian Act introduced partial responsible government, which allowed electorate system. But we are still talking about huge minority. You still have to be a landed class to have representation. If you're a peasant, just a bog standard peasant where you're living in subsistent farming, you are not going to be representing in any way whatsoever. However, we are, in the end, talking about Muslim Bengal. We've talked about how we had the emergence of nationalism. We also saw communities organizing against colonialism, but where did Muslim identity come in? Let me take you toward that path. In one way, is the collapse of unity in Bengal for integration. And it happened because in 1928, we had a major, I usually don't like to make reference to individuals. However, when an individual leading both communities and trying to encourage positive action, if that leader disappears, or in this case, died, there was no other vacuum to fill to support as community cohesion as well as integration, because it was Chitta Ranjan Das, who was a mayor of Calcutta, by the way. He said, okay, we recognize that in Bengal, in the context of public jobs, civil service jobs, Muslim participation is virtually nil. You had Hindu participation, You had universities led by Hindus, but there is no their representation in public institution. So let's change that to reflect the reality of Bengal, i.e., he was actually encouraging positive action. However, once he died, there was no vacuum to fill, and unfortunately, Indian National Congress were not doing enough activities to encourage integration either. And of course, British themselves played a huge part to make sure that didn't happen. And we saw that earlier on. And of course, let's see what Jawaharlal Nehru, in his book, The Discovery of India, has to say on this issue of Muslim and Hindu. Here goes. There was a fundamental difference between the outlook of the Congress and that of the religious communal organization. Of the latter, chief were the Muslim League and the Hindu Mahasabhas. These communal organizations, while in theory standing for India's independence, were more interested in claiming protection and special privileges for their respective groups. They had thus inevitably to look to the British government and for such privileges, and this led to them to avoid conflict with them. And you can see why he says that. So if we look at it here, then we'll go back a bit later around why he said that, but it does happen. However, let's look more into Muslim League. Muslim League, the party that argued for a new community, a Muslim community. Until 1937, Muslim League had remained an organization of the elite Indian Muslims, predominantly from the pro-landlord class, noble class, although it was formed in Dhaka, East Bengal, in 1907, if I remember correctly, just when the first partition of Bengal took place. However, the leader was coming from Gujarat, where there was minority Muslim communities in a majority-led region. However, let's see what Jinnah has to say. He goes, Hindus and Muslims belong to two different religious philosophies, social custom, and literature. It is clear that Hindus and Muslims derive their inspiration from different sources. They have different epics, different heroes, and different episodes. To yoke together two such nations under a single state, one as a numerical minority and the other as a majority, must lead to growing discontent and final destruction of any fabric that may so built up for the government for such state. Now, I know you guys might think, hey, he's the one who's calling for partition, but I'll explain to you later on why this is not the case. He's saying it, but there is no shape as to whether Bengal partition means splitting the region into two and taking one half. However, what we have seen a dramatic change in Bengal politics during the Second World War. And between 30s and mid-40s, Bengal was led by Muslim-led tenants party, a Muslim-led peasant party. It had numerously won elections, successfully gathered momentum, successfully was in control of Bengal government, and that flavor of the government at the time was predominantly peasant-led, untouchable-led. Although the leadership is Muslim and the party membership was Muslim, however, it attracted untouchable Hindus because it's pro-tenant, anti-zamindari stance. However, you expect a leader who had won the election, has the majority in the Bengal governing group, but yet the British government did not offer him the seat because he was seen to be too radical, although he won the election. It was the British government then said, go Muslim League, the group that shows the interest of the Muslims, you go and form a government instead of a peasant-led group. Here you can see Nizamuddin and Sharawadi appealed to Hindus to remove Fazl Haq, peasant-led leadership. Sharawadi announced, so in other words, two extreme groups were willing to form an alliance against an untouchable group. And on that basis, you had I suppose, a class-based group was undermined and paving the way for a religious and communal flavor in Bengal government on the back of peasant and community actions, I guess. But you can see here in 1945 general election. And as you can see, by then, sorry about this, by then, India was pretty much at a stalemate between Muslim outlook and Indian National Congress. All green so far, gradually, near to the partition, it was divided where there are Muslim majority voted for Muslim League, and as you can see, in other areas where Hindu population being majority, it was voted that it should be with the Indian National Congress. And of course, you can see all these stats over here. So it is pretty much a stalemate between two groups. However, it does not mean Jinnah wanted Bengal divided. However, let's see how the Bhadralok, the extreme Hindu group, responded to this. The Bengal Hindu Homeland Movement refers to the movement of the Bengali Hindu people of the partition, or for the partition of Bengal in 1947 to create a land in West Bengal for themselves within Indian Union. When Muslim League's proposal and campaign to include the entire province of Bengal within Pakistan, and because it wanted Bengal, entire Bengal, to be a Muslim Pakistan. And of course, its campaign, I mean, the Hindu Mahasabha's campaign started in response to some of the communal riots that you had in Calcutta and in East Bengal, Noakhali. That meant that in a way you can't avoid to think about communal and partition. However, Muslim League, Jinnah did not want partition of Bengal. However, it's really in the last 3 months of British departure, we have seen a huge dramatic shift. By the way, my slide don't actually mention that, but I do want to say the ultimate problem that we had is between Jinnah wanting federal government, whilst Indian National Congress want a central government. Because from the point of view of Jinnah, if you give federal government, Muslim majority regions such as Bengal will be self-governing, so therefore Muslims will be safe. Whilst if you have too much power in the center, you'll have overall Hindu dominating the whole of India, and therefore Muslims will have no leg in that setting, and that's what it is really. However, just when it was clear that there's no movement in terms of election, and there's communal riot, the British government is on the verge of leaving, and we had a Labour government in Britain under Clement Attlee, and he is now he set up another viceroy, Mountbatten, and he said, okay, let's have a referendum. Referendum, of course, you also have in other places, but from the point of view of Bengal, here is the outcome of the data. In West Bengal, they voted that we want partition. We don't want anything to do with East Bengal. East Bengal decided that it wants to stay. However, if there is partition, it wants to stay. If there is partition, you'll have to go with Pakistan. And then, of course, there was also another referendum in Sylhet, which was part of Assam. It said it wants to join Pakistan. So that's kind of pretty much it, really. Apart from that, I want to show you this video, and hopefully then I can say I'm kind of done, really. Can you all hear me? Hello?
Yes, yes, we can. I can hear you.
Now, can you hear this video? Hold on a sec. Can you hear it?
No.
Okay. So yeah. So let me see if I can do it. If I can't, that's let's do it. Okay, let's do it. How about now?
And I think.
Yes.
Great.
You will agree with me.
But it's now stopped.
Now?
It's no longer playing.
Sorry?
No, it's very clear.
Okay, great.
Oh, okay, it's not playing.
There you go.
Of social justice and Islamic socialism.
Well, it was clear. I can hardly hear anything now.
Equality, fraternity of man, these are all the basic points of our religion, culture, and civilization. And we fought for Pakistan because there was danger of denial of these human rights in this subcontinent. After all, the story of Pakistan and its battles and its achievements is a very story of great human ideals struggling to survive in the face of odds and difficulties. Let us now plan, build, and reconstruct and regenerate our great nation. Now is the time, chance and opportunity for every Muslim to make his or her fullest and best contribution and make the greatest sacrifice and work ceaselessly and selflessly in the service of our nation, and make Pakistan one of the greatest nations of the world. Pakistan is now built complete, and it can never be undone.
Well, there we are. You've heard everything I have to say. Now it's pretty much up to you, really, what you would like to do. Have you got any questions or anything that you want to ask, or any observations, any thoughts that you might have?
Alhamdulillah, it's a very informative session. is there any chance that, I know you're recording it for your own benefit, but is there any opportunity that the recording that you do have, that by any chance participants can get a link to, I don't know, a cloud link or something that we can listen to at a bit more leisure, if possible?
That would be great.
It is.
And,
Go
and
ahead.
see the whole talk. Will you make the whole talk of it? Not, I mean, the captions, will you make those available? So I can read it all over again?
Absolutely. What I could do is send you the slides even now, if you want to.
Wow.
Yeah, you'll get the
Yeah,
slides.
perfect.
You'll get the slides, and I'll be taping this. And don't forget, this is one of 3. So this is only colonial Bengal, and where Muslims need a place of their own. The next one is about, okay,
No.
Muslims got a place of their own. What happens next? What went wrong?
I've definitely got some questions.
Go ahead.
So you spoke about, I've got actually quite a lot of questions, but hey, just, I'm sure other people have as well.
Sure.
But you spoke about Persian being the language people spoke before the Education Act of 1935. Do you know what's happened to that language? What percentage of people now speak it?
Okay, very good question. So Persian, yeah. Okay, so in terms of Persian language itself, we're talking about language, I suppose, of the courts. So before you had, I suppose, a British rule, you had Mughal rule. So in that context, we're talking about only the governing body would do it. So the nobles would do it. Higher civil servant would do it. You had of course, the imperial will do it. The percentage of those who will speak it is probably less than 5%.
Right.
Even less than that. It is only a state official language. But of course, what we had subsequently is more structural. There is no grayness. It's just literally us versus them kind of system. Along with that, we had I suppose, monopolization on a modern level where you had transportation and other things. So English became more rampant.
Right, and then can I ask another question?
Sure.
And then I'll let other people go. You mentioned, right, forgive my pronunciation,
No.
but zamindari system?
Absolutely.
Right. And land reform. Is that very similar to what we're seeing that's been happening in India since September with the largely farmers arguing about the reform in the land reforms that are going on there?
Well, I mean,
is it a similar kind of thing?
Well, yeah, I'm not quite, I have not been following what's happening now, so I'm not quite sure. However, when we talk about the Zamindari system then, ultimately what we're talking about, a creation of a new group that will collect revenue from those who are cultivating land. So they themselves, I suppose, became a landlord. So creation of a new landlord system. I mean, mind you, that system was already there during Mughal time, but there's a difference between having hundreds to hundreds of thousands.
Okay, and one final question. Before the British moved in, you've got, the Hindus, the Muslims. How did they all coexist before?
Maybe someone else want to answer that. I mean, or I can. I suppose there was existence. In fact, you had at the time a Muslim ruler. So Muslim ruler, Mughal Empire was pretty much Muslim-led, and also indigenized, if you want to call it, over centuries. The first Muslim ruler Akbar, we're talking about 16th century, and from then on, there has been assimilation and negotiation and compromise and so and so and so. But we're still talking about an elite group. Amongst elite, you don't see that much of a significance, because if someone's coming from, let's say, Afghanistan, and to the Indian subcontinent, it's the neighboring group coming. So it's not actually that much of a significance. But yes, there is religious tolerance that you had. And also the upper class in India, they were also cooperating, and you either cooperate or there is a battle. It seemed that the Mughal ruler had stronger force, so therefore you have to win it to go in. And since you won it for centuries, you become part of the system. But of course, majority of the population, just to be clear, are still depoliticized, not taking part until 1930s.
Thank you.
May I ask a question, please?
Please do.
Yeah, sorry. I mean, I was driving, so I was listening to in between the whole seminar. So hopefully when I do listen to it properly with my full attention, this question might be answered. During 1900s, when there was a ruling administration, was it predominantly Hindu in the Bengal area? Was it predominantly Hindu, and was it caste system administration? So it was an upper class within their religious framework that dealt the administrative roles between East and West Bengal. You know, because there's this disharmony between splitting or trying to split in the 19th century Bengal area itself, before obviously the rest of the partition into India, East and West Pakistan, etc. And subsequently the subsequent independence afterwards. But in that 19th century, was the administration predominantly heavy with the caste system dictating who would administer on behalf of, whether it's on behalf of the British Empire or whether it was the Indian or the Asian rulers? It was caste orientated.
Every single historian would say yes. So I don't need to be ashamed of it. And the reality is true. It is true. In fact, the bureaucratic system is heavily led by upper caste, Hindu dominated, and it's a well-known fact. In fact, when we had seen partition of Bengal, many of the civil servants, Hindu civil servants, left East Bengal to West Bengal. In fact, as a result, there was huge vacuum as to how the civil service is going to run, because Bengali Muslims were not ready to take those roles because they have not been trained, and those who were trained in the past were Hindu upper caste. And that's why when you had partition of Bengal, major roles taken in East Bengal were of West Pakistani origin.
Thank you very much.
I mean, every historian would say the same. In fact, I'll send you my slides. You can look at some of the historians. They accept that. Even Bengali historians and non-Bengali, they will agree, and they wrote books 1,000 times. And the reality is, unfortunately, it is upper caste Hindu-led. Yes.
So, me?
You go ahead.
You hear me? Oh,
I can hear you.
Back to the land question. When the British needed to set up a way of getting taxes, did I understand right that that's when they actually created landlordism and ownership? So before that, before the British, land at the village level was what? Either communal or family owned, but no sense of landlord, that level of possession and therefore exploitation of the people who work for the landlord. It was much more communal, and it was the British who destroyed that system, would you say?
I mean, well, I wouldn't say they've destroyed it.
Well, by making landlords.
But don't forget, it was still land focused then. Even you had the nobles, you had sultans. You know, they are there. They're the ultimate landlord. Yeah. But what they have done, there wasn't an institution designed to recover money. And Zamindari system was able to do that. And on top of that, there was a heaviness of recovery of money and making sure more landlords are there to generate revenue. And as I said, from hundreds to hundreds of thousands, you know.
Yeah.
And then what we have also seen in terms of the way it kind of led to loss of lives is that there was no money going in to support the tenants in any way. There's no structure at all. It's just one way. Just you made in you've got your produce, pass the finance of the produce to us, we'll take it. And that's it, just one way and go. There's no
Right.
investment at all. So if anything went wrong, you either die or you live or whatever, hence the famine.
Yeah.
Any other questions? Feel free to ask me questions. I'm happy to answer those questions.
Well, I don't want to, I'm waiting.
Okay.
May I ask just one question? With obviously before the British came, or even during the British rule, there was a lot of Raj and principality areas of land ownership. With a redistribution, was there, I don't know if it was, how can I say it, agreeable between all parties, but was there a forcible redistribution of land to the locals at the time of these legislations of land registration, land reforms, etc., when they to do that, divide and rule, you know, to get the power away from the sultans and the rajas, so they weren't just the landowners and everyone else just worked on the land and gave a tax, and subsequently they would give tax to the empire itself. Was there a disproportionate, how can I say, a fraud emanating where specific favoritism was done to certain land tenants opposed to equal distribution amongst the whole population of that principality?
Well, I mean, when it comes to, I think equal distribution of land is a very modern term. So I wouldn't even comprehend in using the term during colonial time. I think that it became an issue, I think, in terms of how post-partition or post-independent the nation would look like. And I remember correctly that East Bengal did pass a legislation which said there needs to be, I suppose, distribution of land. That was a question that came later. I think in West Bengal, the similar debates were taking place during the period of Naxalite in the 60s. Absolutely, but again, it's post-partition. However, when it comes to the colonial time, there wasn't such thing. However, you know, there were still sultans dominating various parts in Rajasthan and parts in central India and not necessarily in Bengal, in a sense, because they were already doing that job.
Yes.
So those who were already doing the job, just incorporate them and leave them alone. And where there was heaviness of focus, and also in terms of industry and infrastructure, emphasize more. And let's not forget, Bengal, especially West Bengal and Calcutta, was the commercial hub at the time of the whole of Indian subcontinent.
Thank you. Thank you. Yep. Thank you very much. I mean, it's very interesting and it's very enriching history there. But it's always been, when we've learned it in school, it's very been biased and one-sided, and I think it's been skewed with the history of the Asian subcontinent in terms of how, you know, industrial revolution happened, how our colonialism always were portrayed. When we were young in secondary school back in the 80s, it was always portrayed as a progressive movement, bringing prosperity and unity and safety, etc. And we were told that it all went to pot when they moved out. So it's good now that we get in that the true of history, even like the American history and European history. Now with the advent of technology, you know, the information is worldwide. It's not very specific to the elite, and everyone's able to access it. Obviously, there's some, you know, biased. Even in that, there's biased literature out there. But alhamdulillah, there's a lot of rich history, good and bad. I mean, it's not always been bad. It's one of those things that have to happen in time. Hopefully, lessons are learned from past that we don't revisit them going forward. And we can live in hope, but lessons of the past have to be learned, and it's good to see historians and persons like yourself looking into the true history and trying to get rid of the how can I say, false information out there to the best of your ability, so it can be highlighted what really did happen, even if it's how can I say, in minor areas where it's local understanding, because you got to remember, like you're saying, there's a lot of illiteracy, and that, like I say, East and West Bengal, there was more literacy in the West and less in the East. So obviously, when it did come to rule, there was restrictions and information and propaganda. Always, you know, the elite always use propaganda to control the uneducated, and you always revere the educated person. So, and that's even to this day. There's a lot of conformism in the subconscious that, you know, some of the official nature is right. There is a lot more pushback now, but the history is very rich. There's good and bad. I'm sure there's been some good elements in even in the Asian subcontinent rulers, in the Rajas and the Mongol rulers, etc. And there's been bad, but at that time, it is what it was at the time that they ruled. And obviously we've moved forward, and it's good to see the history and the true history of all of these countries, whether it's, you know, Anglo-Saxons, England, Europe, and the Asian subcontinent is one area of history that I think has been very, how can I say, not neglected, but it's very hard to come to an unbiased reading of what the true nature of things that happened. Sure. And a viewpoint. So this is a great piece of work. I mean, I only signed up for this one. I didn't know there was going to be 3 different elements to the seminar. So hopefully I can still sign up for the next
Absolutely.
2 podcasts that you're doing, Zoom meetings.
No, absolutely. The reason I did that is because the subject matter is very complicated. And I think people will like to see everything all in one. But unfortunately, if I did that, I won't be able to do justice to the subject matter, because I personally think that in order to understand the history of Bangladesh, you have to see it in different segments. One is colonial time, and which we have done that. And then we have to move to, I suppose, post-colonial, and because a lot of the issues that during Pakistani period have been raised have not been solved during colonial time. So that's why, in one way, yes, you may have argued for a Muslim nation. What went wrong afterwards? This is what we'll be talking about.
Yeah, look forward to it. Hopefully I'm free. I'm just going to make sure that I got to find some time within the schedule. Lockdown makes it easier.
Yeah, sure.
Very busy day on the weekends. Even with lockdown, it still seems to be the shopping period. Okay. But I look forward to hopefully not being out in the car next time.
Sure.
Hopefully I can sign up and go into the Zoom. I haven't signed up for Eventbrite, so I'm not sure if I still have to do that. I'll try.
Any other question in the meantime?
Ripon,
go ahead.
I've learned many things, thanks very, very much. But one thing I'd never really thought about before was back to the original partition of Bengal by the British, in order to divide and conquer and control the two separate. Now, then I think you said that one of the effects of that was that East and West Bengal, the Hindus and the Muslims became much more self-aware of their religion and their culture, which before, when Bengal was not divided, maybe they weren't so. So the division actually made them much more self-aware of their difference. And therefore, and that blew up in the face of the British, because that produced then later on bigger problems, ethnic between the ethnic groups. Now, a counterfactual, is that what historians call when what if it had been different? Supposing the British had not divided Bengal in that sense, might the communities have been more integrated and less aware of their differences?
It's difficult to know, isn't it? I mean, firstly, going back to Bengal partition that you talk about, yes, it raised awareness. I think it raised awareness from the point of view of Bengali ruling group, that yes, we need to think about our language, I guess. And it was also led by Bengali Hindus, and all academics will agree with that. The enlightened group, hence Rabindranath Tagore writing about, he's an aristocrat, a gentry, who wrote about My Golden Bengal. Now, and also from the Muslim point of view, it wasn't really the lower classes who had raised consciousness. It's the nobles. It's if you look at the Muslim League and Muslim League was founded in East Bengal at that time, just during partition, led by landed gentry. So is I suppose, not necessarily the more, well, they might be enlightened, but it's always the highest end of things, not those peasants who are thinking about their day-to-day activities, unfortunately. So that's what it is. So yeah, so is that flavor. So nobles of Dhaka, for example, you see. So those are the ones who are interested in the idea of having separate Muslim as a result of the partition, I guess.
But Tagore was not part of that group. Tagore was a unifier, wasn't he?
Tagore, and so were many enlightened figures. They were unified, yes.
Thanks.
Any other question?
No one has, I'd love to put.
Go ahead, please.
Anybody else have a question?
Hannah, Maya, NA. Go
Just
ahead.
looking in the chat to see if anyone's written anything. I don't think so.
All right. Go ahead.
It's funny because you sort of mentioned Tagore and these other individuals. Were they good at writing from a perspective that wasn't their own religious perspective?
Very good questions indeed. Unfortunately, having read a couple of things, there is looking down at Bengali Muslims. Literature heavily focused on the greatness of Bengali Hindus because it's dominated by that group, and some of the famous literatures reflected that, and Bengali Muslims were looked down as though they were untouchables. So
who at that time was writing with that largest group of people in mind? Who was their voice box?
What do you mean?
So with a lot of these things, history is written by the victors, basically.
Yeah.
Now we're at a time where people like you and I can
absolutely
look and just sort of say, well, actually, let's look at this, and actually, this isn't necessarily correct. Let's put this angle in, and let's, we can fill in the gaps with when we find things in the archive and find things that have been omitted. But who spoke out, if you like, for what would have been the largest part of the population? Who was the spokesperson for, the largest portion of the population at that time?
Now, obviously, I mean, if you're talking about, let's say, music, culture, literature, I mean, there are dozens and hundreds of thousands who are Bengali, predominantly Bengali Hindus. And gradually, as time
the Bengali Muslims, who would have been,
I mean, you can look at
who would have been sort of saying, well, actually, they may be of a lower caste. I mean, was that a discussion that was had, or was it that, well, was nobody looking out for people of
all right, so if you look at, for example, Chittaranjan Das, who was the, I think, mayor of Calcutta just before he died, he's of Hindu origin, but yet he recognized that in order to create positive cohesion in the community, we do have to think about positive action.
Oh, could you put his name in the chat, please?
Sure, I'll just send you the slide, actually, make it easier.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah. Here you go. So you've got the slides in front of you, so you can do what you like. And that should have all the names. I think once he died, so really the leadership for community integration just withered away. And it paved the way for, I guess, just communal topics, communal issues. Here we are, so there. Yeah, so I think Chittaranjan Das, if I've said it right. Okay, so there you go.
Thank you.
Yeah, that's right. So did you find it, these slides?
It's just opening up.
Yeah. Yeah, so a number of factors play a part. But going back to your question whereby voices. Oh, you do have Muslim voices. You do have Muslim voices. Fazlul Haq, who led the Bengal government for a decade, who is of lower caste origin. That's why he had an insecurity complex. However, his battle, his conflict focused heavily on bread and butter.
Haq was before partition.
Haq was before partition, and then when partition did take place, he led the campaign against Pakistan. So that's why it's important to understand what happened now.
That's coming later.
Yes, that's why the same players who were involved during partition were also playing their part post-partition to undermine Pakistan. So the conflict isn't over yet. And interesting enough, we know with Sheikh Mujibur Rahman. Sheikh Mujibur Rahman in the 40s campaigned for Pakistan, but at the same time, later on, he wanted to represent separate from Pakistan. Do you see? So it's interesting, and that's why I deliberately chose to separate colonial period and then post-colonial period, because the same players are there.
And the seeds are there in the colonial period.
Absolutely. So any more questions?
So sorry, this is really annoying.
No,
I'm
go
having
ahead.
problems downloading your
Okay.
presentation. It's my sister. Oh, hang on. Would you mind emailing it? Would it be a pain?
No, it should be fine.
Oh,
Let's try
thank you very
one.
much. There's something my system's saying that it needs to be updated, and
Not a problem.
Ripon, is it possible I can't seem to see the link anywhere in our. Is it possible?
Okay. Yeah.
Maybe if you have email, or if you haven't got our email address, we can give it to you so we can have the whole presentation. And hopefully in future we can actually have this whole podcast or Zoom meeting listened to.
Yeah. So okay. Here, by the way, here's my email. Send it to me. I got so many emails to send to. Let's look. There we go. Oh yeah.
oh, thank you.
Now I've sent it again, by the way.
Yes, I'm just seeing if that's
Okay.
To me, please, Ripon.
Yeah. If you check this chat section, you can download it.
Chat section, right.
Yeah. Or Roger, I'll send it to you. It's fine.
Okay, thanks.
So Lorna, any more questions?
Must say that I've been dipping into Nehru's discovery of India, and I mean, you have to dip into it because it's such a big book. But I do find his clarity of explanation of this period and the questions he raises, and I think it's the accessible language he uses. It's
Absolutely
quite
wonderful.
Yes, actually, just you mentioned. Oh gosh, I might pronounce it.
Go ahead.
I'm just going to spell it. You mentioned two places, and you said that so Sylhet.
Sylhet, yes.
How do you pronounce it?
Can someone say it, please?
Sylhet.
Sylhet. The emphasis on a H.
Yes, Sylhet. Thank you. Right. So
there we go.
What are those two places? Are they still referred to as? Are they still named those places, or have their names changed?
Can anyone answer that for me, please?
Well, Sylhet very much is alive and kicking, and that's where
it's still known as Sylhet.
East London has come from Sylhet.
Yes.
Right. And then Assam is still known as Assam, because so many places the names have changed. So those two names are still in place now. The names haven't changed.
Assam itself went a division based on religion. That was the Christian religion. And a place South Assam, Meghalaya, is predominantly a Khasi group, and they were Christian, and they separated in turn. And from the top of Meghalaya, you can look down a big cliff right down into Sylhet. It was one of my memorable moments when I was walking in that area.
Thank you.
Any more questions?
Sorry, the Hindu Kush has just come up in my head.
Indeed.
where is that in relationship to the two places we've just been speaking about, or is it nowhere near it?
Sorry, Hindi.
The Hindu Kush.
Can anyone answer that? I'm not quite sure.
That's
don't worry.
more. That's more the western side.
Okay.
Pakistan and so on. Yes. Oh gosh.
Yeah, no problem. It's because you just talked about looking over and seeing Assam, and
I'm sure there are many places.
Yeah, don't worry.
Okay. Okay, so go ahead.
That's as close as I got to Sylhet, looking down on it.
I mean, just from family history, I do know when the India partition happened, East and West, we had many relatives that used to trade and have shops in Assam. And it was a very sad moment when a lot of people moved in between both. And it's very sad that Assam, was, as a trading post, it became very split.
Yeah.
Assam is very close to Sylhet. And, like I say, if you do go to, maybe you can oversee the borders and the hilltops of Assam. But it's no longer, as far as I know, obviously it's part of India and no longer part of Bangladesh itself. But I mean, like I say, being born and brought up in England, it's something that, I'm very, I can say disappointed that we don't know our history and our borders of our native country. But hopefully that's something to be addressed and changed in the future. And hopefully it's not lost with our next generation, my children, and hopefully my grandchildren in the future.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So, I mean, in terms of series of talks, obviously I've covered colonial Bengal. There'll also be East Pakistan Bengal. We'll look at modern Bangladesh, and finally, I will also be looking at Sylhet, because I think Sylhet plays an important part in terms of the conflict around Bengal as a whole, because Sylhet always kind of moved around, shifted around. So I think not much people know in terms of Sylhet in the context of Bengal conflict, also conflict in Assam. I think what's interesting, Sylhet has a own dilemma, which is quite separate, because Sylhet is always known, even during colonial time, to have a place where predominantly it's basically a Bengali region that was stuck with Assam. And the Assamese themselves weren't very happy with attaching it with Assam, because there was this insecurity complex going. But insecurity complex based on Sylheti Bengali Hindus coming into Assamese Hindu region, and Assamese Hindus felt highly inferior and had issues and problems. In fact, Assam's state language was Bengali at the time. So there was this insecurity complex going, and that's why that region needs to be treated very differently and exceptionally. And let's not forget, Sylhet had a referendum to whether to be part of Pakistan or not. That in itself raises a different dimension. So I think it's important to kind of address that separately, and no one will talk about it. So, and I would like to do that moving forward.
Very much look forward to that.
You talked about that referendum. Was that the referendum that Attlee made possible?
Yeah. So So you had the general election, which shows that the whole nation or nations are divided among communal lines, basically. Now the question is, how do you deal with communal lines? Mountbatten suggested local referendums. You had referendum in Bengal, so where there are majority Muslims, let's have a referendum to see what they think. There was also specific referendum in Sylhet, and Sylhet has, interesting now, only Sylheti Muslims wanted separation, while Sylheti Bengali Hindus, they did not want that. And of course, they themselves then started to emigrate to Calcutta and emigrate to Assam, which then resulted in further conflict between the Assamese. Yeah, that in itself is quite interesting. So apart from that, I think we reach a deadline. So so please get in touch with me. I'll give you the slides, and then we'll talk more in the future for sure.
Thank you so much. That was brilliant. Thank you.
Fun to meet you all.
Nice to meet you.
Lorna, I'm looking at your typewriter. That's wonderful.
My husband's really naughty. He plunked that there just as I went on.
Oh, I'd love to get that.
Take care.
Thank you. Bye. Bye. Thank you.
Bye-bye, everybody.